Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part two of the series, focused on Configuration Manager Current Branch and the Microsoft Cloud, Azure. Part two, talking about Device Health Attestation. The topic of Device Health Attestation is interesting for a few reasons. One is that Device Health Attestation is one piece of integration between Config Manager and Azure that is not actually listed under the cloud services portion of the console. Right? It is integration between Config Manager and Azure, at least in part, but it's not listed there. Another reason that it's interesting is this is a component that is not necessarily reliant upon Azure. There's choice you can make to either do Device Health Attestation on-prem, which I'll show you, or to do Device Health Attestation in Azure and then link into it with Config Manager. Again, both of those I will show to you. It's interesting also because this is the first video in the series that I actually recorded several versions ago, and I'm including it here, even though it is on an older version of Config Manager, just because it hasn't changed that much, right? The thing that has changed, one particular area I will actually show you. I'll break into the demo here in a bit and show you what actually changed between what you see in the demo and what you see in Configuration Manager Current Branch 1810, which is what this series is based on, right? But besides that, the other part of this video that's unique compared to the new ones I'm doing is just some of the layout of the PowerPoint, right? The content is not different than what it was back then, but a little bit of a format of the PowerPoint that's different. Again, no big deal. So I'm using this older video, and we'll break in a bit. That said, the agenda that we want to talk about what Device Health Attestation is, why we care about it, some of the requirements for Device Health Attestation, the service itself, then talk about how we configure it, again, the service itself. Then we'll bring Config Manager into the mix, talk about how Config Manager in the current build supports Device Health Attestation. And I'll just go ahead and say, because I may forget to say a bit later, that in the Config Manager world current branch today, as of build 1610, it was first actually introduced, Device Health Attestation support was actually first introduced in build 1602 of Config Manager. Hasn't changed through build 1610. We really only natively support kind of read-only about Device Health Attestation as of this recording. Who knows what the future will hold? But anyway, in case I forget to say that. And then finally, we'll talk about troubleshooting Device Health Attestation. I want to give a specific risk scenario, and then we will be done. So what is Device Health Attestation, right? So it is a Windows service. It is part of Server 2016. So if you're going to be leveraging the on-premise variety of Device Health Attestation, you'll need to have Server 2016 in the environment to run that. There's also some cloud variations, as you'll see momentarily. So what it does is it gives validation and status of a few different areas. So is Secure Boot enabled? Do we have code integrity running? Do we have BitLocker? ELAM stands for Early Launch Anti-Malware. Is that enabled? Some of these things that may be new to given environments, they were part of Windows 10. BitLocker certainly was, and it was prior to that. But being able to test at those levels to ensure validity of various configurations, right? It does have three different ways that we can configure it. We can either configure to run all in the cloud, and in that case, it's no specific requirement to configure anything. It's just a matter of making sure the systems have access to the internet. We'll talk about that again in a minute. There's an on-premise variety of this. There's also what we call Azure Cloud, which means it's basically on-premise configurations, but it's running in an Azure virtual machine, right? So just kind of a build on each other kind of progression there, depending on what your needs are. The operational modes, a couple here, EK cert, AIK cert, depends on what you specifically need in your environment, which one you might want to choose. So, for example, EK-cert, that's a mode of operation that's optimized for devices that are not connected to the internet, whereas AIK-cert is one that's optimized for those that are connected to the internet. So really not trying to be exhaustive in this session about the design decisions for implementing device health attestation, but just trying to give some details, and you can dig into those specifics later if you want to implement. And then finally, this is something that is built into Windows 10, requires Windows 10. So we do support device health attestation in all SKUs. Try to also support TPM 1.2 and 2.0. I say try because in my lab, at least one of the machines that I have is old enough that TPM 1.2 doesn't come through and get supported. Well, you'll see that in just a minute in demos. In Windows 10, we can integrate with an MDM framework. So if you're managing through Intune, certainly can support that, whether it's Intune standalone, Intune hybrid, other MDM providers as well. So, the AirWatches, the Mobile Irons, and so forth of the world, if they choose to support that, certainly easy to leverage, and so forth. It doesn't require MDM, as you'll see in the demos. We're going to be using purely the ConfigMgr client to interact with the health attestations or the device health attestation service and so forth, right? And using device health attestation definitely raises the security bar for your organization. There are things you can learn through using a service like this that you can't learn through the traditional mechanisms that are out there, right? Okay. So why do we care about device health attestation? Well, we live in a landscape in security that's constantly changing. We know this in IT, and the folks that are trying to gain access to secure environments are ramping up always their capabilities and ways that attacks are leveraged and so forth. Being in a world with BYOD and all the devices that are out there really raises that bar as well, and trying to help protect corporate assets and so forth, while giving the freedom to use BYOD type scenarios is increasingly important, right? So also kind of a mindset shift. So historically, we've been in the mode of preventing attacks, and that's absolutely something that we should continue to do. However, when those attacks happen, we need to be able to detect and respond to. Device health attestation is available as a way to help detect and help respond to those kinds of breaches if they do get past the preventative measures that we have in place. Customer feedback also kind of leads us this way. Customers have said that they really want and need to have an ongoing open dialogue with Microsoft. There's situations where we've heard SHA-1 is not secure anymore. There's a need to reduce the cost of implementing security, so trying to enable other technologies such as device health attestation can help. Customers want to enable BYOD, and as we talked about, detect breaches when they happen, and there is a general acknowledgement in IT today that passwords alone just don't solve the security need like is needed, right? So what does device health attestation enable? What it enables is security compliance baselines, knowing that you have a baseline understanding of what it looks like to secure your devices and be able to detect drift from that by the device reporting compliance to those baseline configurations, detecting violations against those, triggering corrective actions. Now that's an interesting one because in ConfigMgr, as you'll see, the built-in support for device health attestation as of the current builds is a read-only kind of thing. Certainly there's other ways that you could leverage remediating even in ConfigMgr. There's things you could build possibly to remediate whenever a violation or a compliance out of compliance scenario is detected. In standalone device health attestation, other solutions that might tap into that Windows service, they may offer other capabilities. We'll see as we go forward with ConfigMgr what we build in. The parallel that I kind of think of in Config Manager. Back in the Config Manager 2007 days, we introduced DCM, Desired Configuration Management. It was really a read-only kind of scenario to tell us whenever devices had drifted out of compliance. Fast forward today, even to 2012, Config Manager 2012, we introduced the ability to remediate in some cases, right? And have even made it better, as we've rolled along since 2012. It didn't mean that you could not remediate in Config Manager 2007. You absolutely could. However, those remediations had to be configured on your own through whatever mechanism you wanted and targeted appropriately. Okay. So anyway, the link that I give at the bottom of the screen gives some really good reading about why Device Health Attestation really does support the changing security landscape and why it would be beneficial to implement in a given scenario. All right, so what are the requirements for Device Health Attestation? Well, a few. There's 3 different scenarios. There's the cloud-only scenario, and in this case, there's really no requirement at all, right? We can manage a device with the Config Manager client. We can manage it through MDM. It is a Windows 10. All of this is based on Windows 10 as capability uniquely there. So it does require Windows 10 systems. Any build, this was first supported in the first release of Windows 10, 1507. So as long as you have Windows 10, you can use this. On-premise, again, Windows 10 only can be handled Config Manager Client or MDM. It does require you have Server 2016 in the environment, and it does require certificates. So these certificates can be in pretty much any form. They're really simple X509 certificates, just standard X509 certificates. You can generate self-sign. That's what I do in my lab in the demo just because it's convenient. You can use an on-premise certificate authority, third-party, whichever you want for ease of deployment. Then we progress to the Azure Cloud piece of Device Health Attestation, and in that scenario, it's basically the same as on-premise, except you're running in an Azure VM. All of these scenarios only work whenever you have a TPM chip on board the device that you're trying to use. And what that also translates to, as I kind of found out through trial and error, is this only works for physical hardware. So I use VMs a lot in the testing that I do and so forth. I initially tried to set this up with Device Health Attestation, not really thinking, and came to find out real fast, no, we need physical hardware to have the TPM chip and be able to interact and so forth. So what you'll see in my lab, the 3 demo machines that I have are all physical laptops, various versions of the TPM chip, right? And TPM 1.2 and 2.0 are supported. There are some really old implementations of TPM 1.2, one of which I have in my lab that you'll see in a minute, and there can be some flakiness, in those scenarios, right? But full support for 1.2 and 2.0, assuming that those chipsets are healthy and so forth. Right now, a little bit of difference on Config Manager. The documentation states that we need TPM 2.0. There's some movement, some flux, if you will, in this particular area. The rule of thumb right now is that if you're using cloud only, Device Health Attestation, cloud only, or Device Health Attestation in the cloud, right? Then we support TPM 2.0. If you use on-premise Device Health Attestation through Server 2016, we do support TPM 1.2 and 2.0. Now, in the Config Manager world, and that's just a Device Health Attestation, what we support. In the Config Manager world specifically, the documentation calls out that we support TPM 2.0, though, as you'll see in my lab, 1.2 does work in a Config Manager environment whenever you have standalone Device Health Attestation implemented anyway. So again, a little bit of flux perhaps in this area based on some things that I've seen building out this presentation, but this, good rule of thumb for now. So how do we go about configuring Device Health Attestation? Well, there's, again, the 3 scenarios. For the cloud, there is no configuration necessary. just having an internet connection is all that you need. And there is one example of that we'll see in just a minute. On-premise, there is configuration required, so we need to install the Device Health Attestation service. That's a 2016 thing. We need to download a specific CAB file that we'll use as part of that configuration. Then we'll need to provision certificates and validate the service is working, right? We'll see how that's all done. The Azure cloud scenario, again, no different except that you're putting the on-premise in the cloud, right? So I want to walk through a demo of how we actually go through and configure this. So let me pull in the lab here. All right, so the lab I pulled in. And so to be specific, I've already got Device Health Attestation configured on-premise. I'm going to walk through how I did it. There's actually a really, really good article out there that will walk you through it, TechNet article that will give you all of what I'm about to show you. So just to kind of get that out of the way, if I pull that TechNet article up, and I do that to show it to you, and also so that you have the URL record. So we'll paste that in as soon as I can get Control and IE here. Okay, there. That's the URL I want. So pull up this TechNet article, and you can search for it. Device Health Attestation. Brian Leash has a good article about it. This is what we're essentially going to walk through as we configure it. So there are a few pieces that we need to go through to configure. You'll see in the article, if you follow it, that one place in the article I need to go actually download a CAB file. So I'm going to go show you the URL for that now. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to my DHA server. Again, this is already configured, but it's good to walk through and see it. So on my DHA server, if I go to the web and put in this URL, then you'll see that I'm prompted to download a file. So I've actually already got that downloaded. This is a trusted TPM pack, so essentially a list of trusted routes, if you will, for the certificates and so forth. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but at least that's where we can go and download it whenever we need it. And that reference is once again in the article. Now, to set this up, there is actually a series of small scripts that we'll use. Again, as described in the article, I've actually got those scripts already loaded, and so we'll just pop them open in ISE and try to get or talk through each one of them. So let me pop those open in ISE here, right here. All right, so highlight all of these, and then I'm just going to right click and edit, and that will open ISE. Okay, so script number one. So this one is actually not in the article I referenced. Script number one is to build out the self-signed certificates that are needed. Again, you decide which way you want to go. Do you want to use self-signed? If you do, that's valid. It just takes manual management of those certs. You could probably automate it through a script or something deployed even through ConfigMgr, but you need to create these certs. Now notice I'm creating these certs on my DHA server, right? Then another step in the cert process that we'll talk about is that your client that you're going to manage needs to have a trust back to the issued certs so that we can communicate with the DHA server. That again can be automated probably through a script or something that you deploy through ConfigMgr should you want to use self-signed certs. The far easier way in an enterprise is to use an on-premise certificate authority, or you could also subscribe to third-party cert. Really up to you, but in this case, I'm just doing it manually. So I'm using the new self-signed cert commandlet, telling the cert the DNS name of my DHA server. This is also the subject name of the cert, where I want to place it, so in the local or the personal store of the machine, and then what I want to name it. So 3 different iterations of the specific. Now, to validate this, I'll go ahead and pull up Cert Manager. I actually have it open here, and you can see that the 3 certs are provisioned by name. They're in my personal store. So that script works to get those provisioned out. So that's number 1. Again, optional, depending on how you want to provision your certs. The first script in the article and the second script here is over here. Once we have those certs provisioned, we need to configure the cert to be used in DHA and assign rights to it. So in this case, this small script segment will configure either the encryption or the signing cert. Really works either way. I use the encryption cert here in my lab, and it's going to configure it specifically with what groups or such should have access to it. In this case, the iUsers group. Right now, it works by thumbprint. And so I'm using my encryption cert, so I had to go find the thumbprint of my encryption cert. How would I do that? So here I know that I have my encryption cert. It's really easy. All we need to do, and this would work, this part works the same regardless of how you provision the certs. So I would just double click on it, go to details, and then scroll down, and you will see the thumbprint right here. So I just lift the thumbprint from this cert and paste it into the script, remove the spaces, and uses it just fine. Okay, so run that script. I'm not going to run these because, again, I've already got this configured, and so don't want to mess up the configuration, but run this very quick. You'll have your cert configured. Once we have that, step number 3. So here is where we need that particular cab file that I showed you that we downloaded, right? So specifically, I'm going to make a directory. In my case, it should be base. I actually used trusted TPM at first and moved it. I'll explain why in a minute, right? But wherever you put it, you'll extract it and tell it what location to put it in. This is just extracting the cert, and you see my comments about renaming to base and so forth. So I've already got this pulled down. So let me show you. So I rename this to base. You see trusted TPM base. This is what it looks like. Whenever you extract that cab file, you get all of this. And so again, the idea of this is that we have all of these entities that are configured as part of the certificate trust chain. And the instructions say if you don't have trusts back to these different authorities, you need to remove all of those that you don't trust. Well, for convenience sake, I just removed all of them except Microsoft. And because I know all the systems support Microsoft, you may do something different, that's fine. And copied it into this location. So this is what I'm going to use going forward, right? In here. So this script extracted it initially. I made some tweaks, took away the ones that I knew I didn't need, and then put them in the trusted TPM folder. So now we move to script number 4. Script 4, very easy. All it does is references the setup CMD that's part of this, and so this is all provided for you. You'll see the setup CMD is here. It's really simple. It just simply calls setup.ps1. That will go through and configure everything that you need. You can edit this, look at it, learn what it's doing, etc. A little bit longer of a script, but so forth, right? It's all here so that you can kind of review what's happening. Okay. Now that we've done script 4, now we have script 5 that we need to do. Where is script 5? Oh, there it is, script 5. So now that we have all that precursor set up, we need to go and install the Device Health Attestation service. We're referencing the various certificates along the way with their thumbprint. Showed you how to retrieve that thumbprint. There's the first one is the encryption cert. The second one is the signing cert. Then we reference the SSL cert store, where it is, the cert thumbprint, and then at the very end, we reference the operational mode for DHA, right? And then after that, we run script 6, which configures the certificate chain, and off we go. DHA is then configured, right? So pretty easy to do with all of those scripts. The scripts are not hard. It's just a matter of getting the pieces in the right order, and off we go. So once we have that done, we still need to verify a couple of things. So for example, we need to verify the permissions on the certificate. So I didn't actually see this piece in the documentation. I might have missed it, but either way, one of the things that you definitely need to do is make sure that the IIS iUsers group is configured to have permissions on the encryption and signing cert. So specifically, if we go to the encryption cert and go to all tasks and manage private keys, you'll see that I've added the IIS iUsers group here, and it wasn't here before. Same thing with the signing cert. So all tasks and manage private keys, I've added it here as well. That is important, otherwise things will not work, right? Okay, so now that I have all that configured, I also probably should take a look in IIS just to see if everything looks like it should. So I'm going to go to Administrative Tools and then scroll down to IIS and take a look. All right, so here's IIS, and if I open it up, then you see that I have my default website, and under my default website, I have my Device Health Attestation service. So, in fact, the service has been created as a website, and if I look at my default website and edit bindings, then we'll see that the DHA cert that I've created, the SSL cert, has in fact been used to configure the default website to support SSL, which is required, right? So all of that, all the building blocks and such are in place. So then the question is, how do I validate this on the actual client? That's pretty easy too. There's a couple of step process that I'll use. I'm just going to go pick one of my three clients. Let's just use this one. Oh, let's just use this one. This one. Okay, that's the one I want. Okay, so again, now, just as a reminder, as we're going through this, there are three modes of operation or three ways that you can use DHA. If you're using cloud only, none of this configuration is necessary or matters. All you need is an internet connection. What I'm doing now is only if you're going to be using DHA on-prem or in Azure Cloud, you're configuring it, right? So here, I'm just going to validate. I'm assuming on-prem. This is one of my devices that is working with my on-prem DHA. So I need to go and make sure this device is able to communicate with my on-prem DHA. Now, two ways I do that. First, I need to make sure that this device trusts my on-prem DHA. How do I do that? Pretty easy. I can just browse to the name of my DHA and hit enter, and what happens is, oops, did I type something wrong? Yes. Contoso, not Comtoso. There we go. So it goes directly to the default website, right? Why does it go directly to the default website? Because my system trusts the certificate that's issued and being used for SSL communications. If my system did not trust the certificate that's issued, it would be a different experience. So how do I know that my system trusts that cert? So let me go to MMC and I'll show you. All right, so if I launch here, go and add remove snap-ins, go to the cert manager snap-in, computer account, next, local computer, finish. Okay, and then hit OK. Then in order for my system to trust certificates issued, the issuing authority must be part of my certificate trust chain. So pretty easy to do that by putting that certificate in the trusted root certificates authority folder. If you are using a CA, then you would want to make sure it's trusted at this level, right? And so scrolling down, let me see if I can find where that's trusted. So here is the cert from my lab server DHA. That is the self-signed cert. And let's see, I can go into the cert probably and take a look and see the details of it. And if I were to go down, let's see if I can find it quickly. Yeah, oops, let me see if I can find it quickly. If I were to look at this thumbprint A9 whatever and compare it over to my DHA server, we would see that it matches the SSL cert. So let's go over here, look at my SSL cert, which is this one. Details, scroll down, and in fact, it's the same thumbprint. So because that cert's in common in the self-signed scenario anyway, and it's similar, very much the same kind of concept in the other on-prem CA or third-party CA. Because of that, the trust relationship exists. Now, what if I did not have that trust relationship? Well, let's go look at that, right? And I'll also look at this a couple of ways. So here, this does have the trust relationship. We've seen it. We just proved it. In order for that trust relationship to exist whenever I connect to my DHA server, I have to use the FQDN that was configured in the cert. Well, what happens if I don't? What happens if instead I just reference this by NetBIOS name? Well, it'll connect, but the problem is it's mismatched from what the certificate is configured to be. And so it says, hey, there's a problem with the cert. It's not because there's a problem with the cert. It's because you're not using the subject name as defined in the cert. I can bypass this and continue, but in a DHA world, that would stop the service from working in its tracks, right? Now, in this case, I could go over, I'll go over to my Surface device. This Surface device is the one I'm using to demonstrate cloud-based DHA, and so there is no trust relationship here. So I can go ahead and launch this up and try to connect correctly. And while that worked on my other machine, it doesn't work here because I don't have that trust relationship. There's that cert from the DHA server, the SSL cert, is not part of my trusted root certificate authority there. So probably a bit belaboring the point, but just want to make sure that's understood. So let's go back to my system that does, in fact, have the certificate and one of the ones that I'm using to demonstrate this. So continuing, how do I validate the service? So I showed you the first level, make sure the certs are in place, make sure that's working. If those aren't in place, if those aren't working, then the rest of it is not going to work either. So now I know that those are working. What I can do to validate the cert, and I'll just go ahead and use this URL to avoid typing because I've already typed it, is a URL that will take me specifically to the Device Health Attestation service. You can see it here, Device Health Attestation /get health cert /v1. Now, it says method not allowed because the method is not allowed in this way, but we can at least get to the website, which tells us that the DHA server is ready to go and working, right? Now, while I'm here on the client, another thing that we need to validate is that the client works from a TPM perspective. So we can do all of this configuration, and without TPM being in a working state, none of it matters. In fact, this TPM, what I'm going to show you here, applies to all of the various TPM configurations that are out there, whether it's a cloud-based only, an on-prem, doesn't matter. We need TPM to be working. So I'm just going to go type in TPM at a command prompt, get this box open, and it will tell me the status of TPM. So a couple of statuses here. It could either TPM not ready to use, which obviously that would be a bad thing. TPM ready to use, there's one that says ready to use with sorry, what is it? With degraded functionality. TPM ready to use, sorry, with reduced functionality. That one would also not be good, right? Because TPM is not fully available. What we want to see is what we see here. The TPM is ready to use, right? Now, another good indicator is that all of this information is filled in. Who the manufacturer is, what the manufacturer version is, what version of TPM this is, so 1.2. So I mentioned that TPM 1.2 is supported, so I have two devices that are running TPM 1.2. Let me show you the other device that's running TPM 1.2. That one is right here. So if I expand that and run TPM on it in the same way, okay, so I see the same kind of thing. TPM ready to use. Let it populate here. Yeah, TPM's ready to use. But one thing that's kind of a telltale, manufacturer name unknown. Now, I don't know if this in and of itself is the indicator that this machine is having some problems with this older chipset, or yeah, this is an older machine, so earlier version perhaps of TPM. Don't know, it is manufacturer version 2.22. Don't know what all that means. I just know this one has difficulty, and I'll show that to you, as we get along. But in all of your cases, TPM needs to show ready to use, right, in order to be able to go forward and proceed. Okay, so that was configuring Device Health Attestation, the service. Now what I want to do is show you how ConfigMgr works with devices that are actually configured to leverage Device Health Attestation. So there's a couple of places that we need to look at. First, pretty easy here. First, compliance settings. In compliance settings, we will tell devices either to use an on-premise or a cloud-based DHA service, and then we'll be able to see the results of the device health attestation analysis, what's returned by that service using either the compliance dashboard, real good, nice visual cue to how your environment's working, or even better, reporting. Compliance settings can help us react to scenarios where the device is out of compliance. Again, all of this is focused around Windows 10, managed either with the ConfigMgr client or through MDM. So that said, let's pop back into the lab and take a look at the ConfigMgr server and the configurations associated. Okay, so here, actually, let me go refresh this. So here I have just a view. I have 3 devices in my lab. All 3 of them are healthy and active. You can see they're active because of the green check mark, right? I have 3 of them, lap 64-1 and 2. These are devices that are configured to use the on-prem DHA. Lab surf-3 is one that's configured to use cloud-based DHA. So these are both TPM 1.2 devices. This one is a TPM 2.0 device. So I'll show you how I have it configured. I've created 2 collections. One is Device Health Attestation on-prem. You'll see there's 2 devices in it, lap 1 and 2. And the other is for cloud-based right here, and it has the Surface device in it. Okay. Now, in terms of configuration, I have built client settings, one for cloud, one for on-prem. So cloud is targeted to my cloud collection, and if I look at properties in it, or properties for it, you'll see as soon as this pops up that I only need to make a configuration in the computer agent section. If I scroll down, I am going to enable communication with health attestation. Yes, I am not going to use an on-prem device in this case. So for those 2 laptops, I'm sorry, for the one Surface device, it is going to be cloud only. Now, for my 2 laptops that again are deployed to client health attestation on-prem, right? Then I can see that little bit of a difference here. So same thing, computer agent, scroll down, And now it's configured, yes, I'm going to use it. Yes, I'm going to use it on-prem. And the URL is simply the URL to that server. There's no need to add the / device health attestation / get certificate, anything like that. Just the URL to the DHA server, and then ConfigMgr knows what to do from there, right? Okay, so with that, let's go actually take a look at the way that this interacts on the client side. Okay, and as promised, I'm breaking in here just to show you the slight difference that is in place now since the video was recorded. So specifically, if we go to client settings, and I don't have device health attestation enabled here, but if we go to client settings and look back under the computer agent, right here, we do have the same enable communication with the health attestation service, yes or no, and then the decision about whether to use on-prem health attestation service, yes or no. Right now, if I choose to say yes, use an on-prem health attestation service, then in the previous video, it shows the configuration location for specifying the on-prem URL to be in the client settings. It has moved, right? And so now, if you go under Site Configuration, Sites, and then go to your site and go to Configure Site Components Management Point, okay? Under Advanced Options now is where you specify the on-prem Device Health Attestation URL, put it in here, save it, and off you go, okay? So that's really the only difference, and that's where I'm breaking in to show it to you. Now onto the client stuff. So to do that, we'll start with my two devices, or let's start with the one device configured to support DHA through a cloud-based service. This is a TPM 2.0 machine. So I know that because I'm typing in TPM. I see, yes, the TPM is ready for use. It is 2.0, and so we are good to go there, right? And what I'm going to do is just simply force a TPM cycle. Pretty easy to do. Again, this is already all set up here in the lab, but I'll go ahead and, oops, yeah. Got to have a command prompt open with administrative support. Yes. All right. So restart the client service. Okay. All right. And so that's starting back up. And so we'll just go ahead and proactively go to the logs and see how it works. I've already got it up here. The log that you care about is the comp relay agent. So I'll go ahead and open that up. And so we'll see the service has restarted, right? You can see that it's basically starting up, and we realize that we need to do the device health attestation. We're retrieving the cert. On we go, retrying, and finally we get some things done. We found that we have the WMI bridge. Now that's an interesting thing. It's just a way that it's referred to in the class that handles device health attestation. You'll see that again in a minute. You'll see the status is 3, and finally we're done. Now, I'm going to call this out, right? So as this runs, device health attestation will actually return various statuses to us to tell what happened. In this case, status 3 means everything's good, right? There are other statuses. I'll give you a way to interpret those statuses here at the end, right? But you see that it actually worked, finished health attestation, so we're good, right? Now, we could go do the exact same thing on the other devices and see that it works. Well, let's go do it, even though it might seem redundant. We're going to go do this on my other TPM 1.2 system. And hopefully this one is, I don't think this is with command prompt support or admin, so let's do that. Run as admin, yes. Okay, so off we go. And so at the very least, by cycling through these machines, we'll get up-to-date status and so forth. So we'll go into the compliance relay agent log. Need to open that in trace. Open with trace. All right, so we see, now this is kicking right along. A little bit older hardware, not much, but still kicking along, doing its thing. You can see that it's doing our health attestation check, rolling along. Let's see, did our retry, should be done, successfully received response, sending state message, and so it's finished. Again, status is 3, which means we did that, it's good, and so we should expect at least 2 of our 3 machines to have reported successfully. Now, let's go to my third device that has my older TPM 1.2, shows the manufacturer as unknown, and this one, let's see. Okay, good. So stopping and restarting the service here. And then this one's a bit older, so it takes a little bit longer to generate, but not too long. So we'll open up the compliance relay agent log, and here we'll be able to see that it starts up, does the device health attestation check, and should come back with errors. Okay, so it's trying to retry. Yeah, and here's the error. And so we see the status code is different. In this case, it's a 7, right? So 3 means success, 7 means something different. We'll keep that in the back of our mind in a minute. So that's really, there's a little bit more to show on the client, which I will in just a minute. But in terms of functionality in ConfigMgr, that's really it. So let's go back to our ConfigMgr server. And so on the ConfigMgr server, a couple of different ways to view the data. We can go into monitoring, and under security, we have the health attestation dashboard that's loading now. Okay, actually, this should be updating. I don't know why this is showing 2 errors, because we don't have errors. Probably because one of my machines was offline and it just through this, but with our recent work, it should update here in a bit. But you'll see health attestation compliance status. One of my machines is non-compliant. 2 of them show to be an error condition. I have 100% of my configured devices reporting results, right? And again, I see one of them that's non-compliant. Well, if I scroll down a little bit more, I see this dashboard piece that shows me which components are of concern. Well, now in my lab, I just have 3 devices, and so it's not all that exciting to look at and see what I have here. But in a production environment, it would be more so. Another place that I can go ferret out details that might be more meaningful is under reports. There is one health attestation report. So I'll just sort by attestation, run this, and see what we get back. All right, so I'm just going to put in my all systems collection because it's easy. Hit OK, and view the report. Let's make the report bigger. So in this case, I have my one laptop machine, or one of my laptop machines, and it is in an enabled state with the TPM 1.2. Go across all the different devices, and you'll be able to see the status of the specific components that are out there, right? So pretty interesting information. The other 2 are also here. So here's my second laptop that I expect to have problems because the TPM's older. Here's my Surface. I don't expect my Surface device to be having problems. I expect that it's working fine, as you saw. The Surface device I always take with me, and so I just plugged it in right before I started doing this recording, and so that's why it probably hasn't caught up yet by sending the state message. Give it enough time here, it will. You saw that it actually did do the check without a problem, and so it does have validated to report. Just in this case, it hasn't caught up yet. We'll look back at this before we finish here and see if it's actually caught up. Let me go look at the dashboard again real quick and see if it's caught up yet. Nope, but it will. It will before we're done, hopefully. All right. So also, in addition to the reporting, we have the ability to tap into this with compliance settings. So if I go down to compliance settings and look at my compliance policies and go create a compliance policy, I'm just going to do this real quick, hit test and run through this, move on. I'm going to select Windows 10 because it requires Windows 10. Next, and click New. So here I can actually choose to report the results of Device Health Attestation. So if I can report the results of Device Health Attestation, then I should be able to build collections based on that data and maybe send remediation out to those machines that have a state that I need to examine further. Again, nothing built into ConfigMgr, haven't taken it that far myself, but in theory, it should be possible at least, right? And so in ConfigMgr, that's really the end-to-end of how Device Health Attestation reports and so forth, right? So I'm going to move that out. In fact, what I'm going to do now is go back to my Surface device and make sure that I've actually got the service restarted. So I do, and clearly it has a status 3, and clearly that's a current time. So we should be good here in a minute, hopefully, before this recording is over. All right, so while we do that, let me pull the lab back out of the picture for a minute. Okay, so we just finished talking about how to set this up. Now, as a part of all these discussions, troubleshooting is interesting. Things can go awry, and knowing what to look at and how to work with those things when they happen is important. So we'll first talk about Device Health Attestation. There's a couple of places that we can look at, specifically the web config and the registry. There's also some error codes that I'll show you in a minute. ConfigMgr I want to look at as well. So for those items, let's pull back in the lab and take a look. All right, so let's start on the Device Health Attestation server. So you saw me configure this. You saw that I validated there is a website, for example, that drives the Device Health Attestation. So what I can look at is the website configuration under inet pub. Here's Device Health Attestation. Here's my web config. If I open this with Notepad and go to the very bottom of it, then I'm going to see a few things that are at least good to check if you're having a problem. First are my signing and encryption certificate thumbprint, so I'd want to make sure these agree with what is actually currently provisioned, and then also my supported authentication schema. So in my case, I've actually adjusted this to support AIK pub and EK certificate, right? So those are good pieces to understand. Further, on the various devices that you might actually care about, you can look in the registry. So I'll show you in a couple of different places. Okay, so registry editor, if I go down and look, I will have a TPM entry for my registry. It's under local machine, system current control set services, TPM. And in the TPM set, I will have WMI, and then I will have my health certs and my store and so forth. So this is on the server. Where it's more interesting is going to be on the client, right? So let's, because the client is what gets our configuration of what to use. So we'll look in two places. First, we'll start with the on-prem client, and we'll do regedit. So here, expand a few things. Using a trackpad mouse that I don't like at all, and so there we go. All right, good. So let's get rid of that. So system, current control set, services, and then TPM. So we'll expand that one out. And then look down at WMI, and again, health cert, and the store, And now we see a little bit more here because it is a client, and we'll see the location that we need to be at. So here is the actual DHA server, so I know what my endpoint should be because it's listed here. This is actually put down by ConfigMgr policy. I can see my health cert here, the different signatures and more detail about the service and so forth. So this is a good place to go validate details. So again, that's on my system being managed by on-prem DHA. So what about my Surface device that's being managed with cloud-based DHA? Well, let's go look in the same place. Take me a second to get there again. Expand this. All right. Collapse software, go down to system. All right, control set. Services, and then TPM. All right, we'll expand this. And same kind of thing, we have our WMI, we have our this will go down a little bit, health cert, store. All right, good enough. So notice the fact that we don't have the on-premise, because it is cloud-based and so forth, right? So we don't have our endpoint. The device knows that it's going to use the cloud when it doesn't have the endpoint and so forth. So again, a little bit that could be helpful to know as we're troubleshooting this through. And one more thing while we're here that's interesting on the client side. Let me go back to a client. That at least is worth to know about is there is a WMI class that is leveraged to help with client health attestation, and it is at root SIMv2, MDM, and DM, if I can type it, DM map. Oh, this is going to fail because, again, I have to run WebM test as administrator, so that's my bad. This is, okay, so cancel, exit, let's try it again. All right, run as administrator, yes, and then connect root SIMv2, MDM, and then DM map. Okay, so I can connect it fine there, and if I go in and enumerate classes, why this is not painting right, I don't know, at least it's slow. Recursive, okay, and then roll down, we will see an MDM underscore health attestation here. And then notice that there's a method on it, verify health method, and so we can call that and talk with whatever entity we need, either on-prem or in the cloud, and be able to validate what we need to validate. All right, and we've already talked about, so on the ConfigMgr side, we do have all of the logging that is relevant in the compliance relay agent log. Okay, so while I'm here, I'm just going to go back and check and see if the data has rolled forward finally to the ConfigMgr server. Here, let's see, did anything come into the dashboard? Maybe not, but no, hasn't yet. But actually it has. So we have one machine in error, now two machines that are non-compliant. So that did adjust now that the surface is up there, and you can see that the bars have adjusted too. So just a little bit of time after I plug that surface back in, and we're good to go. All right, so let me pull this out of the equation and look forward. So I mentioned that we have DHA error codes. In our lab, we saw two devices that had an error code 3, which means healthy, and one device that had an error code of 7. So this is a bit of an eye chart, and understand that, but here are all the different error codes and then what they interpret to be. So this is error 7 would be a Windows AIK fail as the TPM was trying to load that particular piece of information. This is where I failed earlier on that older TPM chipset, so not a huge surprise there, right? All right, so as we kind of look toward wrapping down the discussion, want to talk through at least one example scenario where this might help you. And there's a number, right? So malware specifically, again, talked about, we have an ongoing changing security landscape. And people are always trying to find more interesting ways to hack through, right? So, consider a malware scenario where we have maybe a jailbreak of a device, right? The malware disables UEFI secure boot. It also prevents your ELAM from getting loaded during the boot, and then also enables kernel debugging, right? Well, as a mitigation, Device Health Attestation would actually report to you the findings that things are out of whack and let you go forward and figure out, what this maybe malicious attack was, because you know how you configured your devices, how they should be, and it exposes things that traditional antivirus type of things might not even see because they happen at a level that antivirus doesn't really detect, right? So in those scenarios, we could probably go on and on with. But with that, really that's what I wanted to cover in the session, just talk about what Device Health Attestation was, how we configure it on the service itself, how ConfigMgr leverages it. So with that, we will wrap the session, and I will see you next time.